Welcome to episode 32 of Sim Sundays by Gridfinder. Today, we have a pretty cool guest on the show today. I'm very interested in this guest because of my recent foray into the world of commentary. But first, Tom, welcome. We missed each other again last week, but we had a good run for a lot of weeks where we were actually together for a long time. So that was kind of nice.
We did. It's been beautiful. We've found our groove. We've got back into the routine after Christmas. It's good. I feel like we are about to hit a stretch of great guests. And I also would like to point out your bravery, because I've done this before, right? Where you start introducing a guest and you're like, how do I do this without sounding like really over the top or just like full of hyperbole all the time? So you're like, we've got quite a cool guest. He's like quite, and now the guest is sat there in the background like, am I only quite cool? How do I get to be very cool? And why do these guys get to decide? Damn it.
Right. Well, who do we have on the show today, sir?
Well, we have a sim racing commentary legend, according to some. Lewis McGlade, who has commentated on Le Mans Virtual, don't mention the war, ADAC GT Masters, SRO Esports, VCO Pro Sim, is the proud winner of the VCO Simi Awards for Best Commentator of the Year, and has also commentated on real life GB3 and GT4. So welcome.
Hello, yeah. I'll accept the slight accolade there of quite good. That feels right for me. But no, great to have. Great to be on. I've not really done a podcast in a very long time. It's nice to have a little sit back and relax and chat.
Yeah, and thank you also because it was a little bit of short notice, and you were able to fill the time slot for us. And actually, I'm very, very excited because, like I was mentioning in kind of the intro here, I've dove into the world of commentary actually kind of with a little bit of a nudge from our broadcasting team at SimSport with Mike over there when we were at Sim Expo, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you should totally get into it." How, in the beginning when you first started commentating, how did you actually get into it?
It started back in 2012. Actually, I'd only started watching Formula One around 2012. Was that season? I remember I can remember it vividly. Turning on the highlights package. I was bored on one evening for the Australian Grand Prix. I watched the whole season, like on the edge of your seat, especially because that season was absolutely fantastic. And I kind of thought, obviously all these games, I've been well into playing Forza for quite a while. All these games, surely there's a sort of an esports variant of it or of some degree. So I kind of looked into it, did a little bit of Googling and came across Formula Sim Racing, which at this point was massive. Like it was huge on R-Factor 1. And obviously this only 17, whatever, and you kind of don't even have a grasp of the world. You kind of think, well, do you know what? I'm just going to email them. And that's what I did. I sent them off an email being like, I'd quite like to take up some commentary. I've no idea what I'm doing, but I'd like to do it. And they put me on the winter series and stuff. And it all kind of started from there.
Really? So you were watching Formula One and you just kind of go, I think I'd like to
give it a go
on the microphone, and then just an email away, and then off to the races, no pun intended there, and you got started. That's pretty amazing. That actually doesn't sound too dissimilar to the way that I got started with Gridfinder, because I was looking for leagues. I found this little Wix site. Well done, Tom, on the Wix version of the Gridfinder there. And I emailed the same way, and then I guess, as they say, the rest is history. I guess is the saying, right?
That's one email to start everything. Yeah,
we actually found that email. I went through and searched it because I was like, do we have like an anniversary or something coming up? And it was so weird, when you've known somebody what feels like a lifetime, and then you kind of come across the first time you interacted, and you kind of just imagine them now writing that then. It was very cool. It was very cool.
Sometimes a little bit cringeworthy, though. I've noticed that a few times. When I've seen my first interactions with people, I'm like, wow, that is...
Give us an example.
Well, probably this time. When I was emailing them for FSR, I can't remember exactly what it was that I said, but let's be honest, it can't have been that convincing. I had no idea what I was doing.
Wouldn't exactly sell myself, though. So
they did. They were very nice, and I did FSR for a little bit before like spreading over into sim racing and doing some driving and only coming back to commentary. But I'm absolutely sure I've had some very odd emails in my time, like sending it out to people, and now I get to receive some of them, which all of them are actually very nice.
Yeah, like at a certain point in your career, you just like flip flop, and then all of a sudden people are contacting you, and you're like, wait. when did I become important enough to be the one that everyone wants to contact, right?
Well, thankfully, Mike Yao, who's the one who's dealing with everything here, he's the one that normally sorts out gigs for me. So just get him to do it. It's fine.
Yeah, just have him book everything for you.
Yeah, exactly.
So in your first commentary gig ever, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are not dissimilar to me that want to get into commentary, but there's nerves and you don't know how to get started. You don't know who to contact. You really probably don't even know how to do it. What would be like your number one advice coming from so many years of commentary? What would be your number one advice for someone to get started in that world?
It's gonna sound cliche, in a sense, but it's just go and do it, right? Because it's this thing with broadcasting is that I promise you will not be good in the first while that you're doing it, and that is okay. I'm dealing with quite a few people now that have messaged me and like they're trying to get into it for the first time, trying to learn. It's just you need seat time because it will always take at a minimum 5-10 broadcasts for you to even find your rhythm, and to be honest, much longer than that. I have been back and heard some broadcasts from me from 10 years ago. The first ever broadcast that I was ever on was at Long Beach on R Factor 2, and it doesn't exist anymore. But I have there's some clips that still exist on someone's stream of my commentary, and every time I hear it, I just want to die. It is awful. It is beyond terrible.
Can you remember anything that made you particularly wince?
It was just the whole thing. There's a lot of ums in there. Ums are like, yeah, it's just the confidence. Everything. It just there was a lot of ums. There was a lot of I didn't really know what I was saying. You just kind of like trying to describe what's going on, but I had no research and didn't really know the drivers. Yeah, when it comes to talking to some of those that are coming up through the commentary scene now, I always say one of the most important things you can do, and I guess this applies very early on, is research. Research is king on broadcasts. Whether it is about the drivers or the cars or the tracks, you've got something to talk to because every race gets boring. There is always going to be boring laps in the middle where no one's going for overtakes as a calm part of the race, and you need something to talk about then, whether it's like I say, whether it's the cars or some of the history of the circuit, some random stuff, whatever it is, or more importantly, the drivers and what's at stake.
Yeah, right. So do you ever find yourself kind of getting into, I guess, I don't know if it's old habits or just kind of a routine where, let's say you're at Spa for the 30th time and you say the same things. Almost like a broken record. You're like, wait, did I say this in the last broadcast? Or how close together did I actually use this story or this statement? Do you find yourself repeating a lot?
Yeah, so much. And it's to the point of like I can't even remember what they are until they actually come up, right? But every time, I think of how many 24-hour races that I've done a fair few from the commentary side, and every single time, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I start talking about the same stuff, and you're just like, I swear I spoke about this last year.
And on some. Like a sampler, you just hit the button and it's you back on the screen.
Sit back and just be like, right, if I hit play now, then I'm good for like 10 minutes, so I can it's fine. No, it's those kind of things. Whether it is talking about like livery design or things like that, where you're literally just trying to fill air, which obviously happens a lot in 24-hour races. There are so many topics that are just brought up every single time about like, I think every endurance race. I always talk about doing strategy backwards because you have to do strategy backwards. Obviously, you get to the 8 hours to go in a 24-hour race and you start thinking about when you want to make your last pit stop. And every single race, I'm talking about it. And I'm like, I'm bored of hearing myself talking about this, but it just becomes part of the rhythm that you're just sort of like, wow, this will cure 8 minutes. So
it's like that comedian that's on the stage and they're like, I need to bring the crowd back. So they say the old joke that they since moved on from. Yeah, exactly. That's interesting.
I really enjoy. There's been a couple of times where I've listened to the 5 Live commentary from Jack and Jolien and Jenny Gao, and they're so funny, right? Because if when they have to commentate a practice session now on FP3, that's a pretty tough gig, right? When everything is, there's nothing really to focus on. It's just that they're just going around, they're just getting times. None of those times are really going to mean much. You don't know what they mean because you don't know what runs everyone's doing. I remember I was on holiday and I was laying by the pool listening to FP3, which actually as a sentence is not great. That's a. I don't know if that shows commitment or that makes people a bit nerd. I was by the pool, I had the headset on, and I was listening to FP3, and they were saying that it was a really dull practice session. There's really nothing to go on. So they spoke for honestly 25 to 30 minutes about their favorite types of cheese. Yeah. But they went really deep into the cheeses, where the cheeses were from. But like they hadn't prepared this. They just started talking about cheeses, and to this day, I think it might be some of the best commentary I've ever heard.
Yeah. I mean, like Jack has always been someone that I've really, really looked up to. I think he's for me at the moment, arguably the best commentator in motorsport, based on the fact of everything he's done. But there is this casualness while still being involved in the race, and then this honesty, which I think is important, because let's be honest, us as motorsport fans, this is the same in sim racing as it is in motorsport. If a race is boring or a session's boring, it's boring. We know it's boring. Like the fan base aren't idiots, and that's something which I really respect. A kind of a commentary team where they're not droning on about the same stuff. It's kind of like this clearly doesn't matter. Like I say, talk about something that's interesting and bring some personality, and they go, oh yeah, by the way, Verstappen's just gone up to P1, and it's like, oh right, well again, cool.
The boring race back there. It's something great, but moving on. You're right.
Yeah. I disrespect the honesty. Love it.
So when you get into a situation like that where it's a boring race, have you ever been in a situation where you just don't really mix with your co-commentator, and like the conversation is like pulling hair, and it's just really difficult to talk to the other person?
Without naming names, yes, definitely. Yeah. There's always going to be this kind of thing where you will always enjoy working with some people more than others for various reasons, because it's mostly about flow and about commentary. It's why typically I tend to work with the same kinds, the same people on quite a lot of broadcasts, because we've got good flow, we've got good chemistry, and it makes the process so much easier. And then there are other people where they are perfectly competent commentators. They're very, very good, and for whatever reason, you just don't click in the commentary booth. And there are also, the exact opposite of that, where you don't like the other person, which it happens. We're all human beings, and yet still, for whatever reason, in the commentary booth, it just clicks. And you're like, I don't understand this, because I don't like this as a person. But professionally,
I really like working with him.
Exactly, but professionally, it just flows. And it's the kind of thing you've got to, again, treat them as two different things, and just know who you work well with. And eventually, when you can, after enough time, become adaptable enough that you can start to morph your commentary around someone else's needs on a broadcast, because not everyone in the commentary booth is the same. Some need to be led a lot more. Others need to hold the microphone a little bit more, and they're the ones that need to take the lead. You need to kind of be adaptable and work with it.
Yeah.
How do you feel about something I've noticed in sim racing is that commentating sim racing it's a bit kind of nuanced, because you're commentating something which is replicating something else.
Yeah.
And I always think when I'm listening to sim racing commentary, like, where do you draw the line between trying to commentate and create a sense of realism versus commentating, acknowledging that it's an e-sport rather than motorsport? So, like, for example, I've heard lots of commentators will go so deep in on the realism, and they'll be talking about, the drivers are like sweating away in the cockpit because the track temperature is 40 degrees and blah, blah. And like, it's interesting. It's an interesting approach, of course, because it's trying to replicate real world motorsport. But sometimes it makes me feel a little awkward if they're talking about like the danger, if then they're going around the outside, or if they've lost it there, that have been smashed into the barrier, like, we lost such and such a driver there, like, and then referring to a real world driver who died, and you're like, ooh.
It's a bit oof.
Yeah.
I see. That's a super interesting one, because the way I don't, again, it's the whole thing of I don't want to treat the audience like an idiot. I like the idea of being like, this is a simulator, this is a game. Sorry to anyone sat at home when I say it's a game, but it's a game, right? These aren't real things. These are, especially in the modern day, these are very well designed simulators, etc., etc. You're all racing. It's as close as you can get to the real thing. But it's not the real thing. There is no danger. If you are sweating, that's generally out of hard work from throwing the car, because it's as mental strain and moving the wheel, especially with direct drives these days, it is a lot of effort for a long period of time. But I like to kind of play into that side of things, like the different difficulties in sim racing versus motorsport. And having spoken to quite a lot of drivers, there are different difficulties. For example, sim racing is a lot more. It's a lot more of a mental process, because you're driving with your eyes, you're driving with your hands, you're not driving with with your body. Whereas in motorsport, it's more of a natural reaction. You're in the car, and so they're two different sides. Whilst they are very similar in certain aspects, and other sides are not. And I kind of like focusing on both sides of that, like what is different and then what is the same, because I find both sides of that trajectory being very interesting.
It's interesting you talk about how there are valid overlaps. So yes, it is physically demanding to sim race, especially if you're doing like an hour, 2 hours, and you've got your direct drive like whacked all the way up. So I shared yesterday quite is it embarrassing? Maybe it's embarrassing. So yesterday, I'll tell a story. It's not a long story, right? So yesterday I raced in the Enduro Car Series. So last year we raced in the real world Enduro Car Series. And then over the winter, we're doing a virtual version of Enduro Car. So 44 Ks going around different tracks. Last night was Silverstone and I raced and it was incredible. Really, really close racing, intense. I spent an hour. Of my hour, I spent maybe like 55 minutes, literally like door to door, bumper to bumper with other cars. It was one of the best races I've ever had in my life, right? And we're all talking about it. And like that night on the Discord server and in the morning. And then, so I'm trying to get into karting this season. I'm trying to lose a bit of weight. And I was on my Fitbit app this morning and I was looking at my heart rate. So yesterday, I did an hour in the gym with a PT between 9 and 10. And then between 8 and 9 in the evening, I did the sim racing. And my heart rate was higher and more sustained for that hour sim racing than it was when I was doing like my squats and like sweaty work. And I was like, oh my god, right, that's it. I'm quitting the gym and I'm just gonna sim race for an extra hour every day because it was tense. I think it was more adrenaline and excitement than it was maybe like just the force feedback. But it was interesting.
I've had conversations with this with people before. It's like the reason why it's not necessarily about the physical. Like when your heart rate is raised in sim racing, it's not necessarily about the physical component of it, which is normally the thing that everyone goes towards. But I've tried telling this to. We actually had a conversation on the Mont Virtual with Martin Haven because they obviously don't really know. They've not really taken to the simulator. People like Martin and having the discussion with them, being like, it is more mental because if you do a 2-hour practice session, you can do a 2-hour practice session set in exactly the same lap times and your heart rate will go maybe to 100, maybe even 120 if you have a couple of moments where, but it's pretty stable and it's not that high. Meanwhile, you're doing the exact same thing, but you are in a race. That is the only difference, is that you're actually in a live session where there is a result that matters, and suddenly your heart rate is much, much higher despite doing the same things, because it's not the physicality that brings in that heart rate rising. It's the mentality. It's kind of where the pros of the esports world and some of those that come from the motorsport world into sim racing, where they've already taught themselves to kind of calm down in those racing environments, that their heart rates don't go up quite as high.
I can't relate.
To be fair, I had this. So I obviously been in sim racing for quite a while, and there was a time, I think this was probably about 2 years ago, I was in a race. It was at Silverstone, I think it was, or it was on R Factor 2, racing in the touring cars. And I'd done so many races that my heart rate on the start of races doesn't really go that high anymore. It's just kind of it stays quite calm. But I just remember racing down towards turn 1, and it was the race started. I was very calm, and then I don't know what it was in that 5-second run towards the first corner at Cops, and my brain just went, oh, by the way, we're in a race, and my heart just went and I was like, oh my god, like trying to go through turn 1 at Silverstone, basically feel like you're about to have a heart attack. That's that's
you get that for commentating, because you've commentated some big gigs. Like, have you ever, in the lead up to a race, or maybe not the lead up to a race, but lead up of going on air, like in the build up to a race, do you ever get nervous
with new things? Yeah, absolutely. With things like, for example, Le Mans Virtual at the weekend, no, because I've done it. That was our 11th race, and I've been working with them for 2.5 years. Same as Formula Pro and Formula Sim Racing and all that kind of lot. No, my first round of GB4, which was my first ever motorsport commentary, which was last year in just freezing cold conditions in March in Snetterton, hidden away in this little commentary booth in my coat and everything. Like I was like there freezing like this, being like, they're all racing down towards the first corner. It was not very comfortable. I'll say that, but that got my heart racing because it was something. It's that next level. It's that step up, and you're also trying to impress a different group of people.
You say that though, but I wouldn't be surprised if Le Mans Virtual actually has a larger audience than your average GB3 or GB4 race. So it's interesting that you almost place more weighting on it, not necessarily because there's more people watching who care, but actually because it's motorsport versus sim racing.
It's fascinating because I agree. You know, the viewing figures for Le Mans Virtual, particularly for the actual Le Mans Virtual itself, less so the series, but for the actual event, especially back in 2022, the viewing figures are enormously high, and I would absolutely agree with you. They're certainly higher than what they were through for quite a lot of the races in GB3 and GB4, and it is an interesting thing mentality. I think it's more because it was kind of new. Because as the season went on, it actually kind of faded within 2 or 3 rounds. That kind of that heart raising at the start, which I think is very good, because whilst it's a great feeling, you know, those first bits of nerves, you know, kind of getting involved in it for the first time, they're great, but they do kind of pull you away from the moment quite a bit, and you kind of like as a commentator, you almost need to stay kind of neutral and just stay in the moment, right. And so to not be removed from that is kind of helpful, which I say kind of faded pretty quickly, which is pretty good. And then from that point on, it was essentially like commentating on a new simulator, right? You know, and that's cool. I've commentated on enough where it's sort of, you just have to understand the nuances of real life versus a sim.
Yeah, and the differences between the two, I think it's really important that we do separate the two and not try to make it like one thing, one big family of racing, kind of an idea. So obviously at Le Mans, there was a couple of issues that happened. So how do you as a commentator handle the problems when stuff is going like that? Because, well, let's be honest, there's a bunch of trolls on the internet all over the place, and probably chat is just lighting things up, complaining about all the information or all the problems that are happening. Grief. What do you do as a commentator to kind of, I guess, fill the gaps or kind of calm things down and bring it back to the actual event rather than worrying about what's going wrong?
I think the most important thing to always remember, because I've been on enough broadcasts now where this is not the first broadcast where I've had something go wrong. We've had plenty. We had one even in the first one virtual. I've done the virtual endurance championship. We've had issues. ACC last year, obviously we had quite a lot of problems there. You just have to find ways of keeping yourself on topic and understanding that you're doing everything that you can do, and keeping focused on that. And whatever works for you as a commentator, go with that. If it is reading through chat and kind of answering some of the questions, then fair enough. Typically, I tend to avoid it, and it's not out of trying to ignore what is going on, ignore the fans. You know, we will say constantly under those issues that there are issues going on and they're trying to be rectified. Whilst that's going on, let's talk about this. And you essentially turn it into a podcast, provided you're with someone else, and you just kind of talk about random stuff, whatever it is that will get you through it. Exactly. Whatever works, you know, whether it even is at some points going into the differences between belt driven wheels and direct drive and gears and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, whatever will get you through that, you kind of essentially turn it into a podcast.
That's interesting.
That is very interesting.
Since we're at the topic of the Le Mans Virtual Series, I'm interested to know, from your point of view, when you can see these issues happening with the technical side of a race, do you try and almost kind of validate it with the comparison that a lot of people will make between sim racing and motorsport, by saying, obviously in motorsport cars break down, which right. You know, you could have practiced for hundreds and hundreds of hours, and you get to your first race and your car breaks down. It's very unfair, out of your control. It's got nothing to do with the sport. It just happens, in the same way that you could practice for hours and hours and hours, get to Le Mans Virtual and get kicked from the server. It's not your fault. It's not part of the sport. It just happens. Do you kind of resonate with that comparison, or do you think it's different?
To a very certain degree, not all the way, not to the point of what quite a lot of some people have done, because I understand both sides of it. Thankfully I've been a competitor in sim racing for long enough that I do understand the frustrations from both sides. If it's a disconnection where it's kind of you and your internet, or you and your computer, and then it goes, then yes, I think the analogy is very apt, right? Because then it is, because it's you and your computer, and something's gone wrong, or your internet service provider, and it's out of your control, and that's rough. When there is something which is more on the simulator side or on a server side, or even something well out of their control, which these are the kind of realistically some of the things that can happen. I still don't know exactly what went wrong with Le Mans Virtual, whether it was in their control or whatever. Exactly. It's clearly there was quite a few issues that were to be dealt with in, let's be honest, the narrowest time frame that you can possibly deal with. It was a very frustrating time for all of those behind the scenes. I don't think it should be put in the same category as, in real life you have engine failures, because it was affecting large groups of people. And it was like when we were having all the DDoSing and stuff on ACC last year. If at that point you just go, you get engine issues in real life, so tough. These are a sim racing versions.
A bit of a lazy excuse.
Yeah, so these are problems which can happen, but they shouldn't, and that's the bit that we kind of need to focus on. Yes, it's rough that it's happened, but we need to work out how in future that they don't happen anymore, because we already have enough problems in the works which can go wrong, which kind of filter into the that real world analogy. We don't really need that adding to the pile.
And when it's happening live, do you acknowledge it as a commentator? Is it something that you feel you ought to acknowledge to the viewers, or is it something that you try to gloss over and focus on what is successfully happening rather than what's breaking down?
I like the idea of kind of only giving the information I actually know, right? Because I don't, in times like that, especially for Le Mans, because we're in the studio and there's race control and all the surface, they're all in the same studio, and so it kind of in this beautiful time where when I get off air I can go and ask what's actually going on. So we've got that as a reasoning, where I think when we were on air and all those red flags were happening, etc., you say the information that you know. We know that there is a server problem to some degree, whatever it is. Like, obviously the audience aren't idiots, so you kind of you say there's a server problem to some degree. We don't know what it is. It could be this, it could be that, but right now we don't know when we're going to be going back racing again. So kind of giving the information that I know, and then when I get off air, go and ask them what's going on and see if they know, and then whatever information they tell me, then I can pass that on without just going, we're definitely under attack from this and definitely doing that. It's like whilst these are possibilities, you don't know it for sure. And sometimes it's kind of like 90% of the information fits a certain idea that you've got from what you've seen before. And then you say that on air, and then 25 minutes later, you actually find out that wasn't the case. And then the audience is misinformed and you look like an idiot. And so it's kind of like avoiding those.
Yeah.
Being realistic, but then also kind of adding a touch of being vague in there I think is very important.
That makes sense. That makes total sense. And when it's happening and it's clear that there are issues and you've got red flags and the chat is exploding, there's people running around behind the scenes now at this point trying to fix it, and they're doing their absolute best, because nobody who actually works on this, and this is just my own opinion, but nobody who works on these series wants it to fail. No. Like they all work incredibly hard to make sure that these things go smoothly. What was it like? In your headset, was there a sense of panic or kind of anger, or was it just let's fix it and get on with it? Like, were you conscious of what was happening in the chat and online?
Well, obviously, I've got a laptop on there where I can see what's happening in chat, and obviously you kind of see all the negativity, at which point you kind of, I think at that point as a commentator, it's best to ignore it, because that negativity seeps through into yourself, and you can't help it. It's inescapable. Found that one out after the broadcast all finished, then you open up Twitter and you think, oof, tough one. The way everyone reacted in that one was absolutely impeccable for me. I know obviously a lot of drivers will be like, that's total rubbish, but I'm like, from everything that I saw, it was like there was no finger pointing, no shouting, no blaming, no nothing. Everyone had their job and they did what they had to do. And what was going on in my headset, it was from the production, from the TV truck that was outside, from Aid and from Tom, who are broadcast producer and broadcast director, basically just being like, just fill for as long as you can. We're going to try and get in highlights from the start of the race, or we're sending off Hayley Edmonds, who was at Peugeot, basically like a pit reporter that was at Peugeot, trying to get some clips and send them across. Had Alex Brundle at Williams, again, try and do the same kind of thing, so that we had things to kind of like throw onto the broadcast. But they were remarkably calm, leaving us to talk. And when I then left the broadcast, I think we'd just come off of the red flag and I went straight into effectively where race control was, and that was where they deal with the servers and stuff. And again, it was frustrated, very much so. It was stressed, but it was kind of like this quiet level of focus. And again, from me and from my perspective, what I found was remarkable. It was the lack of finger pointing, because we all know, we've all been stressed out, we've all been angry, and it's just like, well, the world's against us all, and it's your fault. Why didn't you sort out the server problem before we came on it? But there was absolutely none of that. It was just laser focus on trying to sort out one problem at a time, trying to make sure the teams are all informed what was going on, which that's incredible. Make sure that we all knew what was going on, that everyone in this entire production, it's an immense task that they dealt with as good, in my opinion, as good as they could.
Sure. Now, there's an interesting thing that's been going on online after that race, and it kind of spilled into this weekend's race as well, where a lot of commentators, or not commentators, but YouTube content creators is where I was going. They're, in the ever get to the most views as fast as you possibly can. Everyone throws out that video that is, this is damaging to sim racing.
Yeah.
What do you think events like this, and maybe even a little bit of what exclusivity does to sim racing, when you have something that's locked behind this one single company? They can't really figure it out quite yet. That doesn't necessarily mean they won't, of course. But, do you think this kind of stuff hurts sim racing as a whole for a good long time?
This is the kind of thing. There are certain ways it does, and certain ways it doesn't. Let's talk about the exclusivity for a little while here, because I think it's something that's been very pertinent as of the last couple of months. And we're all talking about the IndyCar license that obviously motorsport games have picked up. Now, for me, I am against exclusivity. I think it is a bad idea. I like, because sim racing is this beautiful thing where we can be as open as possible. We can have all these mods and things like this that can actually, you can explore the world of motorsport at your fingertips. I think that's absolutely incredible, because without it, I probably wouldn't have seen, I wouldn't know what a Group 5 car was, and I think Group 5 cars are absolutely incredible. But it's that fact that it is that openness that you can go after and find all these things. Now, the exclusive sides of these contracts, the problem that comes from them is they do typically get spun out of basically what they are from one reason or another. Now, for example, with this IndyCar license, obviously what came out of it was that no one can ever race an IndyCar on iRacing ever again, which is not true. It's absolutely not true. Because you can do even a 33 car race around the Indianapolis circuit, doing an Indianapolis 500. You just can't call it an Indy 500. You can call it. There's a lot of things on that contract that you can kind of
an Indianapolis 499 plus one.
or like, there's a series on iRacing called the Open Wheels 500. They can call it the Open Wheels 500. That's absolutely fine. That is well within the legalities of the exclusivity contract. That's absolutely fine. But unfortunately, because one or two people say that are very, very vocal, that is whether they are behind the scenes on iRacing or a content creator or whatever. As soon as they get that, there is this, when we know it's a problem with culture generally, is that rather than researching a topic and going, is that actually true, it's so much easier to just retweet it, just share it, and send your own views without actually looking into it. And unfortunately, that's kind of the problem that we've gone through a little bit through this. And it's that, aside of all of the problems in sim racing, that is the one that will kill it more so than anything else, is a lack of knowledge and understanding.
Yeah, I actually completely agree on that, because it's not the event didn't damage sim racing. It's all the chitter chatter and all the things that people are saying about sim racing that's really doing the damage. Because, lately it's been a lot of bad coming out of everyone's mouth on, I'm going to use Twitter as an example, because that's the primary space that I'm in. And everyone's always complaining about something in sim racing rather than sharing the wins and the good stuff and the awesome things. And I think we need to just shift our mindset a little bit and start to celebrate sim racing instead of worrying about what's in the past already. They'll sort it out. They'll figure it out. There's genius developers sitting on that side of the internet, or whatever you want to say, right?
Yeah, I agree.
They'll figure it out. We can move on to something else. We can have a good time in Daytona this weekend. We can have a good time in all the races that are coming up, or even just generally in iRacing. We just got to move on beyond it and stop stop shooting sim racing down
Yeah.
as they've been doing lately, really.
Yeah, focus on the positives and kind of move forward. And I think that's, like I said, I couldn't agree more that we need to focus more on those positives and more of the storylines rather than delving into the negativity and the toxicity that sometimes has been around sim racing. I kind of felt in the last 18 months we've actually started getting over, and it just throughout various things that have happened over the last 2 months have kind of come back into the limelight of a lot of people, which fair enough.
Yeah,
it was interesting. You were saying just then that streamers, personalities throw out comments without kind of much backing or fat behind them, and then they get picked up by whatever outlet, and then they get retweeted and reshared, and then these kind of very broad brush statements that aren't really backed up with any kind of fact become the reality that people know of sim racing. I was reading an article today on Motorsport Magazine on their website, and what you were describing there about people just saying things on streams and shorts, etc., getting shared versus like proper dialogue is right in the middle of this article. And the article is all about the Le Mans Virtual and what happened. They have a paragraph where they're saying esports racer Jimmy Broadbent, and then there's a quote about him saying if they can't get the event to run smoothly, it's going to damage sim racing. He said in a video, right? So they've just lifted that essentially from probably just one of his streams where somebody's asked him a question on chat or they're talking about it. He said something, and because of who he is, everything he says gets quoted and reshared. And then immediately underneath is a load of quotes from you saying about, as a fan of sim racing, I love seeing Max on track. He brings an enormous fan base. In a sense, his reaction hurts because of the amount of work we've all put in. But then I think about the competitive side. You really do understand it and the team's frustrations. And then you go on to say about how everyone prepares so much for these events. You understand both sides of the coin. McGlade told Motorsport. So there is a direct comparison there between just the streamers who just get statements lifted out of their videos and just spread across the internet versus it sounds like Motorsport approached you, asked for some comments, and then you were able to give them like a balanced view of what actually happened. Yeah. It's kind of odd that because I was skim reading it and I read that bit there and I was like, because I saw that your name was in it, so I was reading it. I was like, oh, this is really good reporting. And then I saw Jimmy Broadbent's name above, and I was like, oh, okay, well they're kind of doing a bit of both. Like they're taking stuff from streams because it's Jimmy Broadbent's name for the SEO, but then they're also like backing it up with a bit of fact afterwards. It was it was really interesting to read. How was that experience after Le Mans being approached by Motorsport Magazine for comment?
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely fine. Like, very, very kind, and just was basically asking for a quote, basically on what was going on. I'm not locked down with any contract or anything else, but obviously, I'm not going to say anything silly because I enjoy the work, and also I have nothing silly to say about it because I think that everything I said in that article is my honest opinion about how that ran, and obviously you do check it, being like, did you actually include everything that I said there, or but it's all there. That is what I said. So fair enough. I think the whole Jimmy Cooks, because I've watched that video that Jimmy posted after it. I watched quite a few because I still want to stay in the loop as much as, like I say, it does hurt. It is brutal, but you want to stay in the loop. And I think that everything was said in Jimmy's video, I do also kind of agree with. I think it was right. The issue is when you have you're pulling quotes from someone's video, you almost have context. You almost have free reign to pull like 2 or 3 sentences and go, right, the rest of it doesn't matter. And it's like, but the rest of it does matter. And that's why I quite liked, at least with the quote that I had there, that it was all that had left basically pretty much the whole thing in and not just picked the 1 or 2 things that actually kind of worked. Which is always kind of like a big fear with those kind of articles, if something that you have said has been taken out of context. And that's the problem with videos. They do have like essentially carte blanche to do whatever they want, as long as the words kind of basically line up. It's that's the nature of this kind of media. It's where we have to be careful. But I think that for me, it is more down to the consumer, the person reading, the person understanding, to take everything with a slight pinch of salt. If you're going to read news, try and not read it just from one news source. Understand the bigger picture and pick it up from a few others. But obviously, who's got time for that? That's why these clickbaity headlines work on Twitter and Instagram and things like that, because you scroll past and then you go, oh, Nicholas Latifi signed for Mercedes, amazing. Not checked that up at all. I've just seen a picture and it looks official. It's got the F1 logo on it.
Shared it.
Yeah, exactly. That happened so many times towards the end of last year. I was scrolling through Twitter and there was something that had come up, like someone had signed for Williams or something. I'm looking at it being like, that I don't believe that. And then you look at where it's come from. You're like, oh right, okay, it's come from like F1 memes or something. You're like, oh great.
I hate those stories where it's like it'll be so and so has signed for Williams, and then the first paragraph is like, rumors are circulating about possibly moving in the next 4 to 8 years. Like, it just completely, it's like just shameless clickbaiting. But I mean, Paul Glover, former Race Department podcast host, has made a really good point, which is this isn't just a problem with sim racing.
Exactly, it's a problem with culture.
Yeah,
but generally, it's a problem.
We fixed it.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Right. So see you. I'm off.
See you next week.
No, it's like I say. This is a problem which has come up. I remember not to give too many examples, but I remember we've all seen videos and stuff of this online where it's and there was one, I can't remember exactly what the example was, but it had like a timeline on two sides, and it had like the someone who does some research and then someone who just retweets, right? And when you kind of look at it, and it was something about something in Sweden. And it played out not in real time, but in a timeline in the video, and it was like, right, this has happened. And then the person, the researcher, looks at it and goes, has that happened though? And then they literally search it up on Google and they go, oh well, okay, interesting. I've actually learned something that's not the case. It's actually because of this that's been taken out of context. Okay. And then they get on with whatever they're doing. Meanwhile, on the other side, it's kind of like, I'm going to retweet it. And then everyone turns into a Karen and goes onto Twitter and then posts this, that, and the other. And it spirals out of control. It gets retweeted by someone else. It's blown where this is the nature of the world we presently live in, which is just in sim racing as well. And I don't know what the cure is for it. I don't necessarily think there is. Exactly. But if we delete the internet, then sim racing doesn't exist. That doesn't cure the problem.
Well, let's not delete
nothing.
We won't delete the internet just yet, because the internet is throwing us some great questions for you from our listeners in the chat. So I think this is going to be in order. James Early in the chat is asking, at what point did you want to become a commentator?
2018. I remember it very well. It was so obviously I said that I started at commentary in 2012. Then I went back to I went to being an esports driver, focused on that, won a couple of championships, and battled some decent levels in sim racing. In fact, I battled for a championship with Nikodem Wisniewski and Kuba Brzezinski, who ended up winning the first ever Le Mans Virtual back in 2015 and 2016. And one of their teammates in that was Pash Gergis, who went off to go and race for Coanda as well. So these are like big names in the world of sim racing right now. I am certainly not as fast as they are now. They have got faster since then. But I was in a decent spot. But then I remember May 2018, I went to the Nürburgring.
Wow, you remember the month and
exactly. Hey, my first ever sim race was July 2nd, 2013.
It was a cold Tuesday in June.
But we went off to the Nürburgring, and we did an endurance race. I was with Jack Keithley and Richard Schaefer, and those two were both fast enough to win the race, and then I came along and spun. We finished third, and it was a great time. I've got this trophy, and it's downstairs. It's a fantastic trophy. Absolutely love it. But it was at that point when I realised that I probably am not fast enough to do anything as a driver, and I certainly don't have the mentality. And that was at the point where I was like, but I reckon I could be a commentator again. I reckon I could go after that and focus on that side. So it was May 2018 where I really started to refocus again on being a commentator with the experience of a driver, which I think has really helped. Well, and James Early should be a commentator as well, by the way. Just throwing that one out there, because I do know James. So
you heard it here first.
Yeah, James Early commentary studies. Off you go.
When we have him on the podcast later, we'll know. We know exactly when you got your start.
Exactly.
On the show, and
exactly. 22nd of January.
So, would you say that your desire to be a commentator was born from your lack of racing ability?
Oh. That sounds very quick.
Yeah.
Whoa. I think you are right. I think, like I say, having the experience in sim racing is helpful, because there's always something to throw back at. And I think a lot of the sim racing drivers that I used to race with, that still race now, they kind of like respect the opinion that I have on air, and that is so useful, because if you say something's like bad in racing, they go, oh right, well, fair enough, it probably is bad. They trust your opinion a lot more because you've been in that boat.
Yeah,
you have battled, but yeah, because I realised I was never going to make a job out of being a driver because I just am not good enough. Whereas commentary-wise, there's a pathway.
Do you know what? I'm sure this isn't how it's meant, but like that was so funny, Chris. Like I feel like that's like, how do we get like? Do you know what? Because I've just thought of the title of this episode is like Lewis McGlade. All commentators are just essentially slow drivers.
Yeah.
Like,
those who can't drive commentate. Done.
I mean, I'm not against it. Right, I'm gonna let's go for another question because actually we've got a lot of questions in the live chat, which is great. Alex Goldschmidt, another commentator. In fact, all the questions from commentators, very possibly. This is exciting. Question for Lewis: which is your favorite real life series that you follow religiously?
Oh, that's a tricky one because it kind of changes all the time. It was MotoGP for a while, but I do, especially since McLaughlin's moved over to IndyCar.
MotoGP is just.
I love it. It's tricky. MotoGP is the one that I've been to of big championships the most. I've been to it twice. Went to Assen and have been to Silverstone. But at the moment, I'd probably say it's IndyCar. Love myself some IndyCar.
Why? Tell us why.
Well, it's got the Indianapolis 500, which is number one on my bucket list to go to. It's the speed, the sound, the atmosphere. You've got 300,000 people that are crammed into such a small space. It's kind of one of those once in a lifetime things in motorsport. Now, yes, obviously Le Mans has the same thing, and I'd love to go there as well. But there's something about Indianapolis which is just even more so. It's the speeds they're doing, but it's just how the IndyCar series is. It's so in a sense compared to some of the other motorsport we've got. It's very pure. I know, obviously, push to pass. Whoa, but and I know they've got a hybrid coming in. But it is very pure. They're racing around some tight circuits that are brilliant. I mean, St. Petersburg, so simple, but I love it. Absolutely love it. Toronto, all those kind of street circuits that are so great. And then you mix that in with ovals, big ovals, tight ovals, Indianapolis 500, some normal road courses as well, like Barber. It's just got such this complete mix of tracks and stuff. And it's just fantastic. And everyone's in essentially the same car. I love it.
Yeah. Well, based on the last 30 seconds, I mean, I'm sold. I've never really followed it, but I mean, it sounds
off you go.
Incredible. Also, there was a lot of tracks there that I was thinking, I couldn't draw the track layout for that. Like, I've seen little bits of it, or like I've seen a photo of it, but that, I mean, I've never been a huge fan of street tracks. It's because
Really?
I'm a bit of a traditional F1 fan, and I don't know. I just love the old classics, not because they're the old classics, but there's something about the racing you get there, the big open corners, the overtaking opportunities. Like, and I know there's a sliding scale between like Spa and Monaco, and not all street tracks are right up there with Monaco. But I have generally found it harder to watch street circuit races. But are you saying IndyCar, not an issue?
I agree. Like, because there's a lot of street circuit races. Let's use Formula One for an example, and everything that's classified as a street circuit in Formula One these days. Which I think Sochi is classified as a street circuit. That's not a street circuit. Miami, not a street circuit. Baku is a street circuit, but I don't like it very much. It's like all the street circuits that come into Formula One, which most of them, these days the new circuits are street circuits. They're just not. I actually really like Albert Park. I don't like the change. I don't like the changes they've made to it because they've kind of just turned it into it's a lot more high speed than it. Yeah, whatever. I think they've removed a little bit of the character from it and made it a bit more generic. But I always used to like Albert Park. I actually do like Monaco, driving it, not watching it. Sorry. IndyCar has that vibe with a lot of their street circuits. It's very good. If you've ever watched Australian supercars as well, a lot of their street circuits carry on that same kind of vibe. Love myself some supercars as well. They had a new circuit in 2017, which was Newcastle, which I remember when it came out, when they first started racing on it, I was so enthralled by this circuit. I thought it looked so cool that I actually stayed up. Bearing in mind, obviously, this is all the way through the night because it's Australia. I'm watching all the support series stuff. I love this track. This track's amazing. And these are like some of the street circuits they've got in IndyCar and supercars and things like that, where they are just they're so full of character. And even though it does look like it's just a 90-degree corner into a 90-degree corner, but I'm like, yeah, but they go around a fountain. How cool is that?
You don't get that
anywhere else.
Listening to you talk about watching that race, staying up and watching the support series, it kind of reminds me that commentary is like the ultimate goal when it comes to a career. You know, that was to do something you love. You never work a day in your life. Blah 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 blah. But if you go and work as an accountant at your favorite football team, it's not, you know, it's do you know what I mean? It's not quite the same. Whereas with commentary, you're literally your job is to be a super fan of something you already love. You just have to dive deeper into something that you want to dive deeper into anyway. It's such a pure career.
It's the more that I've done it, the further that I've progressed, especially moving into GB3 and GB4 last year. You do realize how incredibly privileged you are. Like, I still come from a background. I still technically work in a restaurant, you know, just because it's kind of like there. It's like it's an abnormality to do something that's kind of something that you really, really enjoy as a job. It's not been something that I've ever thought I would be able to do. And you do realize how privileged you are to, like you say, basically, I am paid to come along and shout about something which I absolutely adore. And you get to like walk around the paddock and speak to all these people and be like, I remember at Alton Park walking around and seeing everyone pulling up in their Ferraris and all this lot and speaking to all the drivers. And I got back into the commentary booth and I sat down. I was like, what planet am I on? What is happening here? It's like I get to just be really, really excited about all this. And it's a bizarre experience to be that link between the motorsport world and the regular everyday person that sat there watching it. It's a very odd mediator to be.
Well, so you have your favorites in the real world motorsport. What about the virtual world? Is there some race that for some reason just holds a special place in your season as well for the virtual stuff?
Bathurst 12 hour. Always. Love the Bathurst 12 hour. It's if the iRacing Bathurst 12 hour is the one that I obviously aim for because it's the main Bathurst 12 hour in sim racing at the moment, really. And I love myself some Bathurst. It's such a difficult circuit, such a tricky one. And then to do it for 12 hours consecutively is unbelievably difficult. But it's almost so relaxing. You do it with friends or whatever. That's always the one that I target doing.
I'm racing that one
because it's a bit of fun.
Actually.
Have you done it before?
I have not.
Have you driven Bathurst a lot though, or a decent amount?
A ton, yes.
Okay, you're in for a treat.
All kinds of different games.
Survive the first lap, and you're in for a treat. Survive the first lap.
I'm very excited for that one. I kind of agree with you on that. That track is just amazing, especially just coming down the straights, just flying as fast as you can possibly go.
I did it in 20. I think it's 2021 it might have been, and on iRacing there was 2,701 teams that took part, obviously over all the splits, and there was obviously I did it as a 2-car team with my mate Dan Kell, and there was only 2 cars. I'm sure if there's a few people that are listening to this now, they already know what story I'm going to tell, so I'm sorry, but it's tough. But we got through the entire race with 0 incidents, which is terrifying.
No nudging the wall, no incidents.
Had a couple of grazes. That was on me. Had a couple of grazes with the wall, but got a 0x at the end of the race.
That's amazing.
Which no corner cuts, no car contacts, no nothing. And trust me, in the middle of the race, I was lobbing it over the top. Like I was, and there's something so electric and so pure about that. But there was only one other car out of those 2,701. There's only one other car that had 0 incidents, and it was the car that won split 1. Which just so happened to be Enzo Benito and Max Verstappen. So I'm on the same list as them two.
That's very cool.
There we go.
That list is very short, and it's us and them. Right?
Yeah, pretty much. I've had to make all the social media posts about it afterwards. Everyone's like, "That's such an irrelevant stat." I was like, "I don't care. I don't care. I get to make a social media post with him."
You're a commentator. You have to have a good list of like relevant stats. The more obscure, the better.
Exactly,
well,
I agree.
Those movies that are like #1 in this some obscure magazine you've never heard of ever in your life, but they're like, yeah, we're gonna rep that number
Chris,
one stat.
It's like us when we started this podcast, right? We signed up to this service that's called like Chartable or something, and you get this weekly email with where your podcast ranks around the world, and it'll be like in like the sports, I think it's sports and leisure category, and I'll be like, Chris, massive news, mate! Like we put all this hours into Sim Sundays, and it's finally paid off. We're now the 7th most popular podcast in Latvia. And he's like,
Nice.
no way. It's like, yeah, we have fallen down to number 42 in I don't know, Namibia. But
yeah.
we're up to 17 in Peru.
Yeah. There is something about these, just like these weird stats. You're just sort of like, oh right, well, I mean, no one cares.
Putting
But
them in
still,
my LinkedIn status. 17th most popular sim racing podcast in Peru.
top 10 podcast in 8 countries you've never heard of. Nice.
Yes.
Tick. Put that one on there.
So we've got another good question from the YouTube chat from Jess Games 95. What has been your hardest moment in your commentary career?
Oh, that's
a big one.
That is a big one, because I'd actually, do you know, I think it's because it's very recent. It does, yeah, it obviously stings a bit more. So I actually think I've been very fortunate that I've not had too many properly rough ones. Most broadcasts with Mike Gow are pretty difficult. I may say that because he's sat there listening. It's fine. Probably last weekend. I think probably last weekend.
For some reason, I thought you were going to go there. I really did.
It wasn't the immediacy of the broadcast. It was like getting home afterwards, and then, like, say, the worst thing you do is then check too, because you know it's obviously it's a big deal. So it's going to be everywhere.
Yeah. Do you have to like mentally prep yourself, because you're like, I know Twitter is just going to be this cesspool of just craziness, but I have to read it because I have to know. Like you kind of have to be in the loop, and you have to wade through the sludge, if you will, and go and look at what they're saying.
I definitely should have done. I should have prepared myself, and yet still I just opened it anyway, and then was like, oh yeah, of course. Because like, this is the thing with a lot of sim racing broadcasts, where you kind of do them. You kind of do the ones week in, week out, and whilst they are big in their respective communities, like either on ACC or on iRacing or on R-Factor 2, typically there's enough on, for example, Twitter, like I say, this one that I mostly use, where it's just kind of like there's just stuff that drowns out the negativity and you're okay. Whereas when you do something that's on that kind of scale, you like it takes over the entirety of the sim racing world. So you open up Twitter and
whole week. It's
everyone's saying stuff,
and it's even infected into the Daytona race this weekend.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, there was a lot of competition between. Well, you see, it's not just R-Factor 2 that's got problems. iRacing, look at all this. I'm like, oh god, here we go again. Here we go
people
again.
Were very, very quick to. Like, it was almost like aggressive how quickly people were like, well, let's just wait and see how iRacing does, and shall we? If so perfect, it's like no one's saying that. Like, everyone just calm down.
Exactly. Let's all just accept that. Let's be honest. None of the sims in our little niche of gaming are particularly perfect. They've all got their problems, but that's difficult to kind of like deal with, to see all of that negativity, and that actually kicked me onto the floor for like I don't know, actually on the floor. I mean, I still able to walk around, but it did like hit for like a couple of days where I was just sort of like, I just didn't want to commentate. I didn't want to go near a broadcast because it's like, oh, goodness.
Well, the hard part right now is that there's this big giant influx of money coming into sim racing, and this big giant influx of attention, and you know, with what was it, 100 Thieves FaZe is getting into sim racing.
Yeah, obviously Rennsport and all that.
There's all this new attention coming in, and it's almost like the sim racing games aren't quite ready for that level of attention quite yet. It's while iRacing is a great service, I actually just recently got a completely 100% addicted to iRacing, and I do it like every single day now. It's like
I've well past that. Whew.
AC, like all of these games, they have their own unique problems, and each one has like almost a different kind of a problem, right?
Oh yeah.
So there's nothing on the horizon really or at least nothing that's been officially announced that we really know will fix sim racing. Of course, a lot of people put their money into Rennsport at the moment for some reason, but we were almost not ready quite yet for this level of attention, and I think it's just going to keep going, and we're just going to have to, like, I guess, for lack of a better term, use the same thing, wade through the sludge again in this growing period. But ultimately speaking, kind of like when I was saying that I don't think it hurt sim racing, I think we're going to be better at the other end of it. But man, is it going to be kind of like a flame war on social for a little while, because now all the little problems that we've accepted over the course of the last couple of years are now like with a magnifying glass, and the world is seeing it now.
Yeah, this for anyone who was around at sim racing back in 2017, I think it was, when we had our first proper big esports event, which was the Formula E Vegas E-Race, and it was a mess. It was tragic. It was so bad. And even I said at the time, I was like, that has moved sim racing back 2 years.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like it at the time. But as an overall thing, it does move sim racing forward because it brings a lot more eyes into sim racing. And even if they look at it, even if a majority look at it and be like, well, this is terrible, there's still a lot of people that go, oh, well, I guess it's kind of cool and it could be cool in a few years or whatever. And then they check out the rest of it and be like, oh, actually, no, it is kind of cool now. It's just, the big event, for whatever reason, missed the mark. And we're at that point where, like you say, the more money coming to sim racing, I understand the negative implications that come with it. Like I say, more viewers on, sometimes to see those negativities. Sometimes for a lot of the smaller teams, it can somewhat eradicate them if they have decent talent, because then that decent talent gets picked up by a bigger team.
Yeah,
there are
a massive movement of all kinds of talent going on.
Crazy. The most crazy time when it comes to a driver in sim racing, where it's just like, oh, you've gone, you've left, you're over there, you've jumped, and it's like, oh, everyone's contract, what's going on? As sim racing as a whole, removing all subjective feelings when it comes down to you and a team, or you and a series, or a simulator or whatever, and just looking at sim racing as a whole, including everything, and even in that including things like Gran Turismo and Forza and things like the whole esport, right? More money and more teams, especially from the bigger side of esports, is a positive. It will go through a rough spot in the immediate future, and unfortunately, the bigger side of that rough spot is the toxicity that those kind of things bring. Because let's be honest, no one's going to shake hands after having a rough fight for $100,000 in a champion. No one's going to shake after that. No, you're going to feel bitterly disappointed because you've lost out on a lot of money, and that's where sim racing is.
Going to change the reaction of
exactly
bad things happen. If we have an incident in a random D-class race, and you don't care about that, but when $100,000 is on the line,
suddenly it's very important.
About every single detail about that event.
Yeah, and like I said, that's where we're headed to with sim racing. I think, like I said, there's a lot of positives with it. There's a lot of negatives with it, but I think the positives massively outweigh the negatives. And that's what we need to kind of focus on. That sim racing is growing at an extreme rate. It is becoming a bigger player. Certainly not a tier one esport yet, but it is on a trajectory where it will join that to a certain degree.
I believe it'll be there.
Well, 100%. This is the thing where I think sim racing is weird compared to other esports, because other esports you go, well, CS:GO and League of Legends and Dota and Rocket League and sim racing, right? Sim racing's not a game. It's a genre, but we kind of treat it as one whole thing. I think that's an obscurity in esports that we haven't really realised yet properly. But
I think other than the negativity on social media, I think my main takeaway from last weekend was actually the fact that the outpouring of emotion online is a direct symptom of the fact that people now care about sim racing. Like, a lot of people care. Like, the number of news outlets that were reporting on it far surpasses anything that we've had in the past. And yes, okay, it's bad news, because bad news travels faster than good news. But actually, it was very interesting that a sim racing event hasn't gone well. So many people now care about it. You're seeing it in like tier one media. I can't really use the phrase tier one, but big gaming media outlets were posting about it. So I kind of saw, I was like, okay, this is good, because this is a good marker of where sim racing is. It's a good indicator of where we've got to. Okay, yeah, in this case it's for like a bad reason, but it is interesting to see that this is where we're at now.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, like I say, unfortunately, it is the case that bad news travels faster than good news. That is just human nature. You always focus on the negative a bit more, but I couldn't agree more. I think it is important that we are getting out onto those outlets, but it is becoming more knowledge. I mean, there is that thing that's been brought up recently about I think it was the fourth round, might have been the third round of Le Mans Virtual, but something had gone wrong for Max. And in the F1 press conference that followed the next weekend, he was asked about it in the press conference, and Max said, I'd rather not answer. And it's because it's kind of it matters even to the Formula One world champion. Sim racing matters, right? And I think this is where we're at with esports. It is mattering a lot. I think it matters a lot more than people are actually ready for. right? And no one's like meant to, because it's a game. It's this, it's that, it's the other. And then you show it to like my dad, and my dad will go, yeah, but it's a game. And I'm like, just sit down for 10 minutes and watch this. And then like 10 minutes in, they're like hooked, because it's still racing. It's still, and you get then emotional about a game, but it's so much more than that. It's such an odd experience.
Well, when you're not on the pitch, football is just a game as well to you on the TV. It's the same thing as virtual motorsport. You know, it's just watching competition happen. It's exciting. Yeah. It's fun.
Well, yeah, like I say, sim racing has that thing. Unlike, yes, we've all heard this before, but it is true. It is a good analogy. When you have FIFA compared to football, it's not the same thing. You're playing with a controller. You know, the PGA Tour games, you're moving a mouse backwards and forward. It's not golf. Same with tennis and cycling and all the esports variant of it is not the same as a sport. And then you have things like CS:GO and League and things like, there is no sport comparison to these games, whereas sim racing does have it. And so it's that kind of thing of that has been brought up when the race starts, whether it is a sim or real or whatever, it's still a race. And it still carries that weight. Just because people's lives aren't at risk doesn't take away from the fact that you are watching an actual race.
And that'll do it with that. No, that was perfect. No.
Bang.
We need to get through 2 more questions. Okay. So we've had 2 more questions in the live chat, and I realize that we are already 7 minutes over. So Mike is furious with us.
We're paying him extra. Pay him by the minute. It's fine.
Oh God. Okay. So Scott Beresford has asked. It's a 3-parter, right? Okay. So we can be brief. So, what is your favorite, most memorable moment in sim racing last year?
Last year. Don't have one actually. I think Indy 5 doing the Indy 500 broadcast. Really enjoyed that.
Was that the Indy 500 or was that the 4-tired Indianapolis 499+1 race?
No, it was the official. It's the first time I got to call the actual Indy 500i race. Now that was a pretty big highlight for me.
That's very cool. Okay, what are you most looking forward to this year?
What happens with everything Rennsport wise? I'm very curious.
I'm expecting a big launch tournament or a big launch series of some sort, which is going to be fascinating. Because you're right. Curious. I wonder if Rennsport is going for that kind of title sponsor of sim racing, if you like, when people talk esports, and as you were saying, CS:GO, Dota, Call of Duty, Rennsport, that would represent it. It would be interesting if they managed to pull that off. Okay, and then the third part of this question is, when are you coming around for Domino's Pizza again?
That'll probably Scott Beresford's friend. We've been to British GT and British Touring Cars. In fact, my first ever time watching motorsport was with Scott Beresford, and so soon is all I'll say to that one.
Nice. Well, yeah. I don't feel that you need to make a commitment right now.
Put it on our calendars and the
we're all going over. We'll all go over. We'll have some Domino's Pizza. We'll play some golf. I had some Domino's Pizza today. Not sponsored.
Domino's Pizza, sponsored by Domino's Pizza.
It's not sponsored. It's just convenient.
Well, we're going to go from the complete opposite here. This is the most beautiful, gastronomical segue, right? We're going to go from Domino's Pizza to gluten-free. Gluten-free is the username of the person asking the question.
You can get gluten-free Domino's. Right.
So gluten-free, which is. Do you know what? The reason I love the username gluten-free is because a lot of people, when they see GF, just not in the logo, but for Grid Finder, just see it like GF, like girlfriend or gluten-free. Yeah. Like, no, Grid Finder. We're gonna knock gluten-free off its perch. Damn it. Well,
I love this gluten-free Sim Sunday though.
Gluten-free asks question, which I like, which is a bit of a Dwight Schrute opening, which I quite like. Question: Lewis works with motorsport commentators. How have they adjusted to sim racing?
For the most part, actually, very well. In fact, I say for the most part, it's because I actually haven't worked with a real world motorsport commentators coming to sim racing, and I've had a negative experience with. I've worked with Andy McEwen quite a lot. Obviously works on British GT. Absolutely love working with Andy. Obviously worked with David Addison once or twice and really enjoyed that. Martin Haven I've worked with for quite a bit through the Le Mans Virtual Series, the voice of WEC, the voice of Le Mans to some degree, and that's always an incredible experience. And then worked recently with John Hindhaugh on the IMSA series. He came along for the final round of Daytona, and he was only supposed to be there for 15 minutes and stay for 2 hours because this is the thing with these commentators. They come in and they rub off on you this level of excitement because it's still a race to them, and they're coming into it and they love it. It's always a positive experience because you'd kind of think that they'd generally come in and just be like, oh, I'm just going to go on my phone for a little bit and just racing's going on, and never I've never had that experience with any of them. They've all just come in and just loved it and embraced sim racing for what it is, and I love it.
That's beautiful.
So I have a personal question to change that the trajectory of the conversation a little bit. Sim racing. we already established that you chose the microphone over the steering wheel when it came to the professional life. But what do you race on when you're trying to go around the track in the virtual?
What wheel?
What wheel? Yes, and also what sim is your kind of go-to?
Thrustmaster T300 generally, and sim-wise kind of switches it up. I mean, iRacing, it is the most convenient to switch on and go online. Really is. That is a fact. I've done some endurance racing. I said before that I work in a restaurant, on the odd occasion, and one of my managers in there, hilarious thing that when they first started working there, we actually ended up speaking about sim racing because he spoke about Jimmy Broadbent. I was like, oh yeah, I know Jimmy.
Like,
and I was like, he was like, what? I was like, yeah. And then like 2 weeks later, Jimmy came into the restaurant, which I thought, I was like, that's such a baller move. Sorry, mate. But I do some endurance racing on ACC with them from the restaurant. I'm like, that's just it's bizarre. And then outside of that, generally the thing that I would race the most is probably RF2 and the touring cars, because I could just pick them up, do 15 minutes in them, and then be moderately up to speed, and then hit everyone off. No, I don't do that. I don't know. I'm normally a good one tracks, man. It's off track where I get into trouble.
Well, Lewis, what do you got going on in the next couple of weeks? What do you want to share with our listeners and viewers to catch you live on the microphone?
I have next week, on Wednesday, I've got the start of the new WTCR Esports Championship. And yes, I know WTCR has gone. There's a WTCR Esports Championship that starts next week on Wednesday, alongside with James Kirk. And then later on in that week, on the Friday, I've got the Daytona 2.4 hour, which is on racing, which I'll be doing with Cameron Roger and Zach Sweeney. And then on the Saturday, get a 6-hour broadcast where I am doing the SimGrid VCO World Cup, the rerunning of that, which is, I think it's the 6 hours of Paul Ricard that we'll be doing. That's what I'm doing next week. And have no idea what's happening the week after that. It's on a calendar somewhere, but I tend to ignore it until I have to.
Right. Now, Tom, we've been doing this thing that we did try to do at the very beginning of last season, where we have the previous guest ask the current guest a question, any question they would like. And then, of course, the guest, you this week, Lewis, you would be asking our follow-up guest a question. Tom, do you by chance remember what the question was from last episode?
Well, This is I've just been doing some remembering here. So we don't have a question for Lewis because the question from Robbie Staples from G2 Esports was for James Baldwin, who, for reasons that we've all just found out on Twitter,
I can pretend to be.
You can pretend to be James. So we have a question in the bank for James Baldwin from Robbie from G2 when he gets in. So you're completely clear of having to answer a question, but we would love you to ask a question for our next guest.
Do we know who it is?
We do know who it is. It's the infamous Aussie Stig.
What question will I ask? I'm just going to go, okay, when you're driving, racing, etc., this is a weird question, do you breathe through your nose or your mouth? Because that is a question which could distract you.
I love that. Okay, so something I've also realized is we really, really need to get in the habit of like letting our guests know that we're going to ask them to ask the next guest a question.
That was like,
but do you know what? There is now a part of me, now that you've asked that question, do you breathe through your mouth or your nose? I'm like, maybe if we don't warn them we're going to get crazy questions like that, which is much better.
It's just a casual question. It's like something random.
Yeah, otherwise we're going to get, what's your force feedback settings in
RF2? What's your fastest lap around Spa in a GT3 car?
Yeah, exactly. Or what do you think about tire pressures? Anyway, so I'd much prefer this way around. So yeah, great. Right, that is in the bank. We will ask Aussie Stig that question this time next week.
And then, Lewis, if some of our listeners and viewers want to find you on social media, they could probably just search Lewis McGlade and find you pretty easily.
Yeah, Lewis McGlade 78, if you really want to. 78 is my racing number.
78 is the racing number. There you go. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode. Tom, do you have any last things to say?
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the very candid insight into what it was like being kind of backstage, if you like, for Le Mans Virtual, because that was fascinating. I kind of was watching that all unfold with this real sense of dread and sympathy for the team. So I was really excited when you were coming onto the show to ask you about how it felt behind the scenes. Like, what was the feeling when you were kind of listening to everything on the mic or seeing the admin Discord chat channel kicking off? And so yeah, thank you for that.
Well, thank you for having me, for enduring my waffle for the best part of 80 minutes. You're the soldiers here.
No, this was a fabulous discussion. This was very cool, especially from my end, because you're a commentator. I'm trying to kind of dip my toes into commentary, and it's very cool to just hear other stories about how they got started and how you handle things.
Thank you very much. Some commentary gigs. So if we can share the beef at some point.
I like that idea. But yep, that's going to do it for this week of Sim Sundays. We'll be back next week. We are not racing this week for anyone that is on YouTube with us. If you want to race with us on Sundays, go ahead and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, whatever social media is your choice of, I guess, doom scrolling, if you will.
You can whatever yours your poison.
Yeah, whatever your poison is, go ahead and follow us there, Grid Finder. And then, of course, we'll be back next Sunday at 8 p.m. UK time for another episode. Special thanks to our episode sponsor, Trak Racer. We didn't get to use the rig, Tom didn't get to use the rig this week, but he will probably next week. That's going to do it. See you guys next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.